Thank you so much, Leo, for this wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for putting together this conference. It's so awesome to be in the room with all of you here. So I want to make sure that before we get started, we give another round of applause to the organizers, Leo, and everyone else that's here. I want to hear you all. Yeah? Woo! And that's not all. I also want you all to give yourselves a round of applause because you did give yourself a day to learn more about Angular and be part of this awesome community. Make sure to say hi to the speakers, to the organizers, and to each other. Like, get to know each other because you're probably running into the same type of challenges and you love Angular, right? We're here with the House of Angular as well, and it's just wonderful to be here. So do make sure to get to know each other and give yourselves a round of applause as well. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Kristiyan. Kristiyan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Kristiyan. I'm on the Angular team. I work on components and the framework. I'm based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And yeah, that's basically it.
And as Leo mentioned, I've also recently joined the Angular team, but have been part of the Angular team and have been working with Angular since probably 2012 or so, and I loved using it, and now this is like such a dream job for me, so I'm so happy to be here and so happy to be representing the Angular team today. All right, so let's get started, and let me tell you a story. It's about the American Air Force back in the 1950s. Pilots were having trouble controlling their aircraft, and incidents were on the rise. And they couldn't understand why that was happening. So they looked at the skills, they looked at the technology, and nothing was really coming up until they looked at the cockpit. And what was interesting about the cockpit was that it was created for the average person. But who is really the average person? What they discovered is that in trying to fit the average person, it didn't actually fit anyone. And once they made that discovery, they redesigned the controls in the cockpit to be adjustable so that they meet the absolutely unique needs of their pilots. And that ended up laying the foundation of expanding the Air Force to women and building a more diverse and inclusive workforce. And you might be wondering, how does that apply to Angular? Well, we all know that Angular is a very opinionated framework, and we know that that's one of our strengths. But we also know that as each of the pilots in the story earlier, developers have different set of problems that they're solving, a different set of tools that they love to use, and a different set of customer needs that they are solving for. So just as the Air Force made those controls flexible, in the same way we're building into Angular knobs so that developers can use the framework in a way that fits exactly their needs. So we want to meet developers where they are. And one way in which we're doing that is through listening. And for those of you that have filled in the Angular Developer Survey last year, we thank you. For those of you that haven't, know that there's still an opportunity to do so. We're actually working on a new version of the Developer Survey, and we highly encourage you to send us your feedback and fill in that survey. To our knowledge, this is one of the largest front-end framework or front-end surveys out there with over 20,000 participants. And we take it very seriously. It usually feeds into our discussions about the roadmap and into our prioritization process. So looking at this data, we see that a lot of you are happy with the productivity that Angular brings to you. We also notice that Angular just helps you with keeping up to date with releases, but we also know that we notice that there's opportunities for improvement. So one of them is debugging and profiling. A lot of you have told us that it's not the best experience. So over the past few months, the Angular team collaborated with the Chrome DevTools team to launch improvements to the debugging experience in DevTools. And actually, these changes are going to benefit everyone in the ecosystem, so not only Angular. We've worked with the DevTools team to enable a better experience for debugging and profiling for all frameworks. And people from both teams worked together to enable developers to debug and profile web applications from an authoring perspective, in terms of their source language and project structure, with access to information that is familiar and relevant to them. When debugging applications using Chrome DevTools, authors generally only want to see their code. As you can see here in this screenshot, I am searching for component, and actually the first results that I'm getting have nothing to do with my app component file, but rather it's a list of files that either belong to the framework or maybe to some of the node modules that I've installed. So ideally, we don't want to see that. We want to see the code that's relevant, that we've authored, that's relevant to us, not the framework code. We don't want to debug the framework. So we worked with the Chrome DevTools team to improve that. And in order to achieve that, the DevTools team has introduced an extension to the source maps that's called Google Ignore List. And this extension is used to identify third-party sources, such as framework code or bundler-generated code. And when a framework like Angular uses this extension, authors, so developers, are now automatically going to avoid code that they don't want to see or step through without having to manually configure anything. So this is going to be available to you now if you, NG?
Install.
Update. So this is available in NG update, after you do NG update and you update to version 15. But also make sure to be on one of the latest versions of Chrome, which I think should be just above 106, if I remember correctly. So now, if I search for app component, you can see that this is going to be the first file that's listed, and I'm going to be in the context of my application and the code that I have authored. In practice, Chrome DevTools can automatically hide code identified as third-party in stack traces, in the sources tree, in the quick open dialog, and also it's going to be able to improve stepping and resuming behavior in the debugger. So here, again, we have a screenshot of a stack trace that's not necessarily very useful. This is a 404 error where only one of the line items there has to do with our authored code, and everything else is code that comes from the framework, from Zone.js, and that's not very useful as we're debugging our application. And this is what the improved stack trace looks like. As a result of those changes that we've made, you're now able to see in the stack trace code that's relevant to your application. And the same applies for our debugging experience. So when frameworks or bundlers inform DevTools about third-party scripts, DevTools automatically hides all irrelevant call frames and jumps over any ignore listed code while we're step debugging, which is awesome. How does that sound? Is that resonating? Yeah? Is that a good improvement from your... Yeah?
Ooh.
Awesome. We're definitely going to continue improving this, and know that this is available out of the box in DevTools. And at the same time, you also have, for debugging your application and profiling, you also have Angular DevTools that you can use for more custom experience. Another feedback that we heard was that sometimes the error messages aren't very clear. Like, expression has changed after it was checked. How many of you have run into this error? Okay, that's probably 80% of the room. So that's why we made an error guide. No, we're actually working on better improvements so that you don't run into this error. But in the meantime, the team has actually spent a significant amount of time just understanding what are the common errors that cause confusion for Angular developers. And we did that by aggregating Google search results, by looking at Stack Overflow posts, by looking at Quora and people reporting there that they're confused about this error. And we categorized all of these errors using error code. We wrote detailed error reference pages on angular.io. And we also worked with fireship.io to record a set of videos for those of you that are visual learners and prefer to consume content in that way. And whenever this error is thrown, we link to these pages directly into the stack tray, so then you can better understand how to fix these issues. And going back to the survey, another clear area of improvement is testing. It's right there at the bottom of satisfaction for Angular developers. So in Angular 12, we added support for 3 popular end-to-end testing frameworks, Cypress, Nightwatch, and WebDriver.io. For those of you that are using Playwright or have experimented with Playwright, we also have a migration. They also have a migration guide for Angular applications. And currently, new projects that are running NG end-to-end will walk developers through choosing one of the integrated end-to-end frameworks. And these tools support custom builders and schematics, which automatically update your project's configuration to integrate with your Angular applications. One step further, in version 14, based on community feedback via the request for comments process, we've decided to deprecate Protractor, while also working with the community to find a long-term support option for active projects that wish to continue using Protractor. We do recognize that not everyone is in the same place with their end-to-end testing journey, and some teams might not be able to immediately migrate off Protractor. So we partnered with the Hero Devs team, and they will create a public fork of Protractor, which they aim to support longer term. But we understand that end-to-end is only part of the testing story. So going into the next year, we're focusing on investigating challenges with unit testing and improving your experience there. So please do send us your feedback. Remember to fill in the Angular developer survey, because that's going to really help us prioritize issues. And stay tuned for updates. And also,
NG update.
Yay! Awesome. We also hear that you are excited about native tooling and faster build time for your development and production environment. And currently, the Angular builder uses Webpack as a bundler. And then we also use ESBuild for code optimizations like function inlining, and then Cursor for further code compression. And while this configuration is performant, we also recognize that the ecosystem has evolved and there's better options there. So in version 14, we introduced an experimental ESBuild-based system for ngBuild, and this compiles pure ESM output. And in version 15, we've made improvements to that experimental builder, and we've added support for watch mode for your dev workflow. And our goal is to bring the support for ESBuild in developer preview, and then follow the stable release for ESBuild support. And just giving you a preview at the difference between the two build tools. So on your left-hand side, you can see a Hello World application that uses the currently stable build pipeline. And on the right-hand side, I've configured a new project to use ESBuild. And the first project takes about 7.1 seconds to build, while the ESBuild-based project takes about 3.6 seconds. And this is consistent with our findings that with ESBuild, we have 57% faster code builds for projects. And you can enable this today in your project by editing angular.json file and replacing build browser with Angular browser ESBuild. This feature is still experimental, so please give it a try and share your feedback with us on GitHub. Let us know how it goes for you and if you're running into any challenges. So I'm going to hand it over to Kristiyan now.
Yep. So shifting gears a bit, another strong theme for our team has been reducing the learning curve for Angular. This is something that we've been hearing consistently that people struggle with. And one way to do that is actually by reducing the number of concepts that developers need to learn when they're early on in their Angular journey. So every developer, when they start, they need to do a Hello World application. So let's look at what an Angular Hello World application looks like right now. So you have to create your app component, which actually prints out the Hello World. But you also have to create an app module, and you need to reference the component in at least 2 different places in that module. And you need to add the browser module to your imports, and then you actually get to bootstrap your application. And this can be a lot of information for somebody that's just trying to print out Hello World on the screen. And of course, another actual area of confusion we've heard about is that people confuse what JavaScript modules are and NG modules are. So we've actually created the documentation page just to explain this difference, but of course this is more of a band-aid than anything else. And the NG modules are very powerful, but they're also very complex because they have a lot of different responsibilities. So just if we look at the public API surface of NG module, it has compile time configuration through a declarations array, but it also has runtime configuration through the providers array, which configures dependency injection. But then we also have composability and grouping and configuration through the imports and exports arrays. And this can just be a lot of concepts for somebody that's just getting started. And NG modules are a great way to actually organize your application and split it up and reuse that code. And we've seen many different patterns emerge over the years. So many of you have probably written a shared module or routing module or things like that. And these are useful tools when you're building complex applications. But if you're just getting started, you probably don't need to know all of this. So that's why we wanted to explore what a simplified getting started experience looks like. And this is where standalone components, directives, and pipes come in. So let's look at what a Hello World example looks like using a standalone component. All you have to do is create a standalone component and then bootstrap the application. And this is much simpler for somebody that's just getting started. And we can look at what a side-by-side is. So on the left, you have the NG module-based application, and on the right, you have the standalone component-based one. And you can see just how much simpler it is using the standalone component. And another cool side effect of standalone is that actually now your component is the smallest unit of reuse in your application, which makes it much easier to lazily load. So in this example, we have a router configuration, which is much simpler when you use an NG module. You basically just do a native dynamic import, and then you just load your module, you load your component, and that's basically it. And actually, rewriting our own APIs to support standalone allowed us to gain some improvements. So for example, changing the router to support standalone allowed us to shave off 11% from the bundle without losing any sort of functionality in the process.
That's awesome. Woohoo!
And to be clear, we don't want to remove NG modules. We think that they have a place in the ecosystem, but we want to enable a getting started experience that doesn't require people to know about them until they actually need them. So we've made sure that NG modules are interoperable with standalone. So what this means is that you can take a standalone component and import it into an NG module. You can also take an NG module and import it into a standalone component, and everything just works. And actually, another cool thing about standalone is that it enables us to ship features that we couldn't before. So I have a little challenge for you here. So let's say we have a CDK tooltip directive and a CDK menu directive. How do you take these 2 directives to create a menu with a tooltip component with the current Angular? So you could do something like this. So you have the menu with tooltip class that extends the CDK menu and the CDK tooltip. But of course, the ones of you that have actually tried doing this, you know that it doesn't work because TypeScript only allows you to extend one class at a time. So this just doesn't work.
Boo.
So the other option is that you can just remember to add the CDK tooltip and CDK menu attributes anytime you use a menu with a tooltip. And this is going to work, but of course, it's not very maintainable because, one, there's nothing guarding you from typos. You also have to remember to import the modules that the tooltip and the menu come from. And anytime you want to add new functionality, let's say you want to add touch gestures or event tracking or something like that, you have to go through every single usage of the menu with the tooltip throughout your app and add those extra attributes, which just isn't maintainable. For the more adventurous ones of you, you could also try using TypeScript mixin functions. So they actually allow you to inherit from multiple classes at the same time. But as you can see in this code, like they require a lot of boilerplate. You need to change things in at least 3 different places. They're very error prone. Like we use this pattern in Angular material, and it's been a nightmare throughout the years. And actually, it doesn't support many Angular features either. So it doesn't support host bindings, it doesn't support dependency injection, queries, and things like that. So to address all of these issues, in Angular version 15, we've introduced the new directive composition API, which is enabled by standalone.
Woo!
So let's look at how we can implement that example using the directive composition API. So all you need to do is to pass in the CDK tooltip and CDK menu directives into the host directives array. So what this does is that it tells Angular to apply the CDK tooltip and CDK menu directives whenever it creates a menu with a tooltip. And it's just all the queries, all the dependency injection is just going to work out of the box immediately. We can take this example a step further by using the object literal syntax. So what this also tells Angular is that the disabled input and closed output from the CDK menu should be exposed on the same element. And you can actually use the syntax to create aliases for the inputs and outputs as well. So you can rename disabled to my custom disabled or something like that. And this API is useful for some advanced use cases, like when you're building a component library. But it's also useful for the more common use cases, like the take until pattern that we've all used. So in this example, I've created a very basic destroy directive that I can then throw into the host directives array of any other directive and get quick access to a destroyed subject. So now I don't have to think about declaring a subject, declaring an ng on destroy, calling next in the ng on destroy, completing the subject, and then having to do that over and over again. I can just throw this directive in and use it in my take untils. And with that, let's go through some of the features of the new API. So the first one is that we don't have any limitations as to how many host directives you can apply to a single host. You can apply as many as you want. The second one is that the public API of the host directives is hidden by default. So what this means is that none of the inputs and outputs from the host directives are exposed automatically, and you as the component author decide which ones should be exposed and under what names. Another cool feature is that it actually supports all Angular features. So things like dependency injection, host binding, lifecycle hooks, everything you can think about, they just work with host directives. Host directives also have a very special execution order. So what this means is that any host directives that you apply to your host are going to execute before the host. And this is powerful because it allows you to overwrite any configuration defaults or any host bindings coming from the host directives through the host. Host directives are also chainable. So this means that you can have host directives with host directives with host directives, kind of like host directives all the way down to create an entire chain of composed behaviors. And finally, host directives are injectable. So what this means is that you can inject the host directive instance into the host or have the host inject the host directives. And this allows you to interact with the TypeScript API of your directives directly. So you can like call methods and things like that. We also have a small set of checks we've put in place to make sure that host directives actually make sense in the Angular mental model. So the first one is that host directives have to be standalone. So this means that the directives that you pass into the host directives array have to be standalone. Like the component itself doesn't have to be, but the ones that the host directives array do. So we did this in order to make sure that dependency injection makes sense. Also, you can't use components in the host directives array. We know that we say like components are directives, but in this case, there's no way to actually apply multiple templates to the same element. So that's why we have this limitation. And finally, we only allow one directive instance per element. So what this means is that if you have a directive that matches in the template, and then it's also applied through the host directives, you're going to get an error because you would end up with two conflicting instances of the same directive, and that's going to break down a lot of different concepts. And if you want to learn more about the directive composition API, Jeremy has an excellent video on the Angular YouTube channel where he explains more. There's a short link up above if you're interested. And I'll leave it there for a little bit.
And Kristiyan, how do we get to use the host directives?
We ng update.
Yay!
All right, and with that, I'll hand it back to Simona, who's going to talk about some of the explorations that have been top of mind for our team.
Yeah, so we're really excited for what's ahead for Angular, and we're actively running several explorations and exploring multiple topics that we think are going to make Angular so much better for all of you. And all of this in mind with simplifying the developer experience and accelerating the developer experience that you all are going to have. We're looking at how we can continue to improve our documentation by focusing on the initial learning journey, the usability of the docs, and consistency of presentation of topics. And if some of you are interested in contributing to Angular, I also highly encourage you to maybe consider making some contributions to the documentation. That's a good starting point for many, many good contributions along the way. So we have a lot of detailed contributors guide that you can check out on the angular.io website. So highly encourage you to consider doing that as well. We're also exploring improvements that we can make to hydration, and this is both in the form of improving our documentation, but also exploring topics like partial hydration and resumability. And finally, we're exploring reactivity and asking questions like, can we have per component change detection? Can we have zoneless Angular? Can we have computed properties? But most importantly, we're exploring all of these topics with the priority of evolving Angular while also maintaining platform stability and really bringing everyone along. And maintaining the properties of an opinionated framework that includes the knobs that you need so that developers can use the framework in a way that fits their needs exactly. Grazie, thank you so much.